The next type of subsistence strategy that we want to talk about is going to be horticulture, which remember is just that small scale farming. Okay, and this is going to be, by definition, small scale crop cultivation characterized by the use of simple technology, but the absence of irrigation. Okay, so simple technology is going to be things like hand tools and things like that, but we're not going to have like tractors or heavy machinery or any irrigation, even moving water from one place to another. Okay, usually these cultures are going to be sedentary, so if you're maintaining a plot, you can't really leave it the same way you would if you were a forager and you need to travel to find food. So you're more likely to stay in one place if you're a horticulturalist. The plants are going to require tending to, and you can't do that if you're traveling or away from them. This is going to be also cultivation of small fields and or gardens for household or maybe small scale trade, but not investment. We're not farming here to sell things to create a surplus. What we're doing with horticulture is providing food for yourself, your household, and maybe a little bit throughout your community. There might be some trading, but it's not a way to make a living necessarily. And it's not a way to collect a lot of surplus money. I'm going to start with very small plots and simple technology, so having a low impact on the land. You're not doing a ton of heavy digging or cultivation in that way, and you're using relatively small plots because, again, it's just for you and your household, maybe a few households over, but not a large amount of people. Also, we're going to be relying on human labor and energy. These simple technologies that we're using are things like hand tools, hoes, shovels, that sort of thing, as opposed to energy coming from machinery or animals in that sense. Also going to have smaller yields. So because you have a small plot, you're not going to have a ton of yield. This is increasing your vulnerability because if something happens, you've lost everything, as opposed to blight only taking out maybe part of your crop or an animal eating part of your crop. You have very small yield, so it's likely that if some of it is damaged, all of it will be damaged as well. And again, keep in mind that we're also probably relying partly on gathering, hunting, or trade with others, even if you're majority horticulture. So a common form of horticulture is going to be Swidden agriculture. This is more commonly referred to colloquially as slash and burn agriculture. I prefer the term Swidden, and a lot of academics do because it is a more legitimate sounding term than slash and burn. It has less stigma associated with it, and people don't kind of bristle when they hear the term Swidden agriculture as they do slash and burn. Slash and burn has gotten a very negative connotation, whereas Swidden agriculture focuses more on the benefits and the use of this type of agriculture. Basically what you do with Swidden agriculture is you'll clear and burn a small area of the forest or whatever natural environment you live in, and then you'll plant in that burnt area. And so what burning does is not only is it a quick way to clear the land, but it also releases a lot of nutrients into the soil from the process of burning, and the ash is really good for the soil. Okay, and so you'll plant on that piece of land for a while, and then once it kind of drops off, once you've used up the nutrients in the soil and you're not producing quite as well, you move to a new plot and you repeat the process. You burn a small area, you plant there, and then continue to plant for several seasons until the fertility of that soil drops off, and then you move on to a new area. Okay, and while you're doing this, while you've moved on, the initial plots or plots that have been used previously lay fallow, which just means that nothing is there. You're not cultivating on those lands anymore. But this does sound kind of bad, right? You're burning an area, then you use it up, then you move to another, and you burn another. But if done properly and of the right time frame, what you'll do is you'll have fields in rotation. So areas that are currently laying fallow aren't abandoned forever. You will reuse those, let them grow up, reburn, and then replant in those areas. And so you're rotating between a number of areas. It's not that you burn here and then it lays fallow for the rest of forever, right? And you just continue burning and then exploiting the resources. you're coming back to those areas, you're circling back to those places that you farmed before. Okay. So you've got to have pretty low population density because it does take up a lot of space. You can't have people living on fallowed land because then it's no longer fallow. And a lot of times these plots will lay fallow for decades, right? So we're waiting a long time as the vegetation continues to grow and animal species move back into that area, and you up the soil, right? And you fill the soil with nutrients again through natural processes. But you can't have people living there during that process, so that defeats the purpose. We do also like to point out that a shift from foraging to agriculture, Swidden agriculture or horticulture, was not about discovering how plants grew. It's kind of a myth, and not sure why it's perpetuated this way, but we tend to think that people were living and they're foraging, and then, oops, we accidentally discovered that plants grow when these little seedy things come out. Well, that's not what happened, right? A lot of people foraging and cultures that forage have a lot of vast knowledge about how plants grow and how to cultivate plants. So there are some other theories, but foraging tends to be easier. Like we said, there's less work. And the shift requires additional pressure. If something's working, you're probably not going to change it, right? So if foraging is working for your community, why would you decide to now clear a bunch of this land that has edible substances on it to plant more edible substances and then have to work to cultivate them when they're already existing naturally? So the shift generally requires additional pressure from an outside source or internal pressures of things like population growth, where you can't actually maintain the population through foraging, or population density could initiate a shift to another type of subsistence mode. So it's not just that all of a sudden people learned how to cultivate or that we figured it out. There have to be other pressures that result in a shift in subsistence strategy. Okay, details are still debated, so this is another theory that is debated, and there are people who disagree and people who have evidence for other types of theories, but this is just one, and because this is an intro class, we don't have time to go into all of them, but just one theory about maybe a shift from foraging to horticulture.